Canada is vigorously pursuing new agreements as an alternative strategy to trade.
There might be some very prime opportunities with some of these new agreements very quickly to bring in talent without a lot of the bureaucracy.
LMIAs will become less relevant, which seems to be the desire of a lot of foreign employers.
Understanding Prime Minister Carney's mandate on trade agreements and what it means for Canadian immigration on this edition of Impulse.
I'm Howard Greenberg.
Hi, I'm Naumaan Hameed.
And Naumaan, we have to talk about free trade agreements. It's the flavor of the week. What's your impression of where Canada's going with free trade agreements?
Well, I think we heard very clearly at the Davos conference that Prime Minister Carney's very much focused on establishing new relationships with as many countries as possible where it makes sense. Obviously, that would have an economic rationale, but as being immigration experts, that also opens up mobility provisions and the movement of people, not only goods and supply chains.
Well, there are 15 agreements in place currently covering 54 countries. It's sizable. And we know that Canada is vigorously pursuing new agreements as an alternative strategy to trade. And we also know that one of those countries is India, in which Canadian officials have been and will continue to interact with their corresponding officials in India to move that agreement through rapidly. And so what does all that really mean? It means that we're going to have a different flow to Canada, that primarily these categories that we now use to permit people to come to Canada will be greatly expanded and maybe overtaken by free trade agreements.
Well, in each free trade agreement, each member state may have a different focus in terms of the type of agreement, the type of mobility provisions. We've seen in some smaller regions, you may have actually a professionals list. It could be a negative list where they list certain occupations, everyone else can participate. But those are typically for smaller regions. I think you mentioned India. When you've got large regions and huge populations, typically in those cases, we've seen more specific pathways, contractual service providers, independent professionals.
Sectorial agreements.
That's right.
You want to give a little background as to what you think that could look like?
Well, I think if you think about the current state that we have, Canada has a lot of challenges in certain industries. They're trying to focus trade and supply chain. The larger projects need these types of assets, but they also need people. And we've always argued that Canada, although there's been pressure, we've had too many people in the most recent past. If we look across in economic sectors, there's massive shortages. So could it be the right agreements with the right countries allow not only good trade, but people coming in to deliver on these key projects? We have pipeline projects, infrastructure, energy projects. That could be the wave of the future while we rebalance immigration through these selective trade agreements.
So up to this point, there's been a focus primarily on CUSMA, the U.S. agreement, which is going to be renegotiated or at least revisited. So we'll see what happens. Those occupations are kind of old under the professional category, and they really don't apply to today's economy. So they're going to get a looking at. Besides the current agreements in place, the fallback for companies has been intercompany transfers and LMIAs. I venture to guess that with the expanded impact of free trade agreements, LMIAs will become less relevant, which seems to be the desire of a lot of foreign employers, not Canadian employers, who are trying to bring key resources to Canada and are faced with LMIA rules, which basically, in many situations, don't make sense.
And I'm surprised that many employers are not fully aware of how liberal in some instances and how beneficial these agreements can be. But now you mentioned about 15 agreements in 52 countries. So if you're looking at your talent strategy, you really need to understand which programs would facilitate the right type of worker from which country. And even the intercompany transfer in some of these agreements, they have more liberal provisions. A 6-month trainee can come in on
right.
intercompany transfer. A lot of the tighter compliance requirements that are in the regular ICT are not necessarily as strict in the trade agreements. So there could be more flexibility. You have a lot of choice, and there's a lot of strategy as to how you use these trade agreements.
Well, I think Prime Minister Carney is motivated to open doors and to get the free flow of trade and services flowing so that Canada has its top 10 trading partners well within its sights to expand business. So let's wait and see. It's coming.
Yeah, so if you're a foreign company doing business with a Canadian customer, pay close attention. There could be new doors open. And if you're a Canadian company in search of talent, to your point, the LMIA is kind of a last resort. There might be some very prime opportunities with some of these new agreements very quickly to bring in talent without a lot of the bureaucracy.
I could see us in the not too distant future sitting down with our corporate clients discussing new strategies for how they're going to develop a workforce in Canada, or just be able to send a workforce to Canada that may not be employed in Canada. There's a lot of new strategies coming on the horizon.
If you're an employer and interested in learning more about how the trade agreements can benefit your immigration plans in Canada, please reach out to Greenberg Hameed and subscribe to Impulse Weekly.